Hello, and welcome to this podcast prepared for Met Matters. Climate change is a hot topic. The world is warming, but politics seems to be cooling, at least in some countries. We are now at 1.5 degrees centigrade above what would be natural, and people worldwide remain very concerned while opinion polls repeatedly show they want more action. So it's a critical time, and it's important to keep looking at the evidence. We hear that climate change may be accelerating because of the damage that climate itself is doing to the natural environment. Let's put that to the test. For that, I have with me two guests, James and Sam Curran, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say about climate and nature. So, you've recently published a short paper in the Royal Meteorological Society's journal, Weather. It seems like it's grabbed quite a bit of attention. First, James, can you tell me how this article came to be published?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. Way back, I trained in physics and meteorology, and then worked in oceanography and hydrology, all on environmental pollution. I ended up running Scotland's Environment Agency, and when I retired after many years in management, I just felt kind of desperate to do some science again.
And Sam, how were you involved?
Well, as he just mentioned, my dad was keen to do research again, and I myself have a doctorate in biology, and had also worked in the environment sector for a good few years. So in all honesty, we just got chatting.
Chatting about what?
Well, let's start with the good stuff, the biology. All life on Earth depends on carbon. For billions of years, plants have used energy from the sun, water, and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to make the feedstuffs on which all life depends. A lot of that carbon has ended up in chalk and limestone, and some in the traditional fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Since the Industrial Revolution, humans have meddled profoundly with that carbon cycle. That's obviously pretty risky, and we thought we could maybe investigate how nature is coping, or indeed not coping.
So, James, what did you actually study?
Well, we knew that the best record of atmospheric carbon dioxide stretches back about 60 years now, and it's recorded on a mountaintop in Hawaii. And that record shows a noticeable dip every year across the whole record during the Northern Hemisphere summer. That dip is because all the vegetation begins to grow in the summer months and sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. As environmentalists, both of us thought that looking at whether the size of that dip, was it getting bigger or smaller year by year, would be a pretty good indicator of how nature is doing. Is nature thriving or indeed struggling, as we rather suspected it would show?
I see. And you did that first study about 10 years ago now. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what did it suggest?
Yeah, that is right. We were a bit tentative, if I'm honest, of our first two papers, which were indeed published about 10 years ago. But the great thing is that the latest paper, which came out earlier last year, reinforces the same finding that we found in the previous two. Very simply, we have found that the world was absorbing increasing levels of carbon as carbon dioxide emissions went up. But in 2008, approximately, that changed, and it actually started to reduce. This is a really big deal and fundamentally changes how we need to think about climate change.
So nature is in trouble. I think we knew that anyway. So do these results tell us anything more?
Well, you're absolutely right. Everyone knows that species are going extinct. There are fewer birds and insects, fish stocks are low, but this tells us that the whole system is weakening. And it inspired us to look at what the implications are for climate change, which is driven, of course, mainly by carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. You know, land-based plants suck up huge amounts of carbon when they grow in the summer, putting on leaves, growing bigger, feeding carbon down into the soil through their root systems. Then in the winter, leaves drop and decay, releasing quite a lot of carbon back into the atmosphere.
That's the carbon cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, and Overall, the terrestrial biosphere mops up about 1/3 of our human emissions. The oceans also mop up about another third. It's called natural sequestration, part of, just as you say, the carbon cycle, and it's seriously bad news if it's found to be failing.
So you started out looking at whether nature was in trouble. You've ended up finding climate is in even more trouble than we've thought. Sam, is it a big effect or not?
Okay, well, Dad, if you don't mind, I'll maybe try and make what you've said a little bit clearer. So imagine you've left the taps on, running in your bath, so the bath's filling up. Let's say dangerously so. But as it fills up, it eventually hits the overflow, so the bath begins to fill a little more slowly. Great, right? But then a sponge gets stuck in the overflow, limiting the amount going out of the overflow, so the bath begins to fill up faster again. That's kind of where we are at now with CO2 in the atmosphere.
Okay, that makes sense, but can you give me any real examples, not an imaginary bath?
Yeah, sure, but it's worth first considering why this might be happening. Our research demonstrates that sequestration is in decline, but it doesn't actually tell us why. However, as scientists, we can hypothesize, and we can have a pretty good bet on why it might actually be happening. And it's very likely it's due to combined environmental breakdown. Things like heat waves damaging forests, permafrost melting, new pests and diseases damaging vegetation. All these things we already know about. But Germany is actually a really good example of this. It's estimated that in Germany, perhaps 8% of its forest cover has been lost due to heat and drought weakening the trees, which then succumb more readily to things like the lethal bark beetle. And to go back to your earlier question, globally, the total effect is big, and it's looking like it's accelerating. For example, because nature is in trouble, it's already soaking up around 150 million tonnes less carbon dioxide each year. By 2050, when we would hope to reach net zero, it could well be an accumulating 300 million tonnes less each and every year, year on year. That is a big deal.
Sorry, can you make those numbers more real for me and maybe for our listeners?
Well, yeah. Firstly, the terrestrial biosphere being in trouble means that atmospheric carbon dioxide is now increasing 25% faster than would be the case if the increasing activity of nature back in the 1960s had continued over the intervening decades. That 150 million tonnes per year mentioned just now is about what the Netherlands currently emits as a country. So it's like adding another Netherlands each year, every year, to all the global human emissions. By 2050, because of the acceleration, it would be more like adding an extra Spain each and every year. It means climate change will accelerate even faster than it already is, and sadly makes reaching net zero appreciably more difficult.
That sounds quite worrying, if not even very scary. Sam, I guess you agree with that rather bleak outlook?
Well, yes and no. I'm relatively young myself and have a very young daughter. We are indeed leaving a terrible legacy for this and future generations. The climate is ultimately going to be so disrupted that it will drive potentially huge migration from parts of the planet that become increasingly unlivable. Food supplies will be disrupted. The public costs of droughts, fires, floods, and heat waves will impact on standards of living everywhere. It's, in all honesty, not a happy thought. But in respect of nature, we know how to, and certainly can, rebuild its ability to soak up a proportion of our carbon emissions. Traditionally, we've been enacting specific legal designations to protect a particular species here or there, or a specific habitat. That's been useful, but evidently nothing like enough. Despite those efforts, nature is generally in decline.
Okay, but what then is a better alternative?
Well, several major studies across several continents have shown that the trend of human development and agriculture breaking up or fragmenting natural habitats is pretty devastating. Setting about reconnecting habitats with, for example, habitat corridors, and doing it at real landscape scale gives a big boost to the so-called ecosystem services. That's all those benefits that nature provides to us for free, like healthy soils, pollination, crops, clean water, clean air to breathe, and particularly a stable climate. In fact, the fundamentals of a safe and healthy life for all of us. So let's reconnect habitats right across the world. That can actually be done fairly cheaply by letting nature do it itself. We should just butt out and let natural regeneration occur where it will be most effective and advantageous to nature, climate, and ultimately to us.
That sounds so good. Before we wrap up, perhaps any final messages?
Okay, what shall I say? Well, many governments say that we have a climate emergency. Many governments say we have a nature crisis. Nature and climate aren't separate things. They're part of the same system. When nature suffers, our climate protection suffers too.
And the reverse is also true. If we look after ecosystems, they will look after us. There's still time, but the choices we make now really do matter.
Well, we've covered nature and climate, the past, the present, and the future, as well as the impacts of bad and hopefully good human behaviors. It's been a fascinating story. Thank you so much, James and Sam. And to conclude, we are reminded of Rachel Carson of Silent Spring, who, I think, more or less said, we are part of nature, and a war against nature is a war against ourselves. Thank you so much for listening.